One spring day in Rome, I was having lunch at the Taverna de Greci, and I happened to sit across the table from a fellow sketching on the paper tablecloth. It turned out he was another American, a sculptor named Dimitri. The Taverna's always full of artists, because you can get your fill of spaghetti there for 15 cents. The two of us got to talking and found we had a lot in common. Both New Yorkers, both in Europe on a government scholarship, both XGIs, and both interested in just about the same things. He invited me up to his studio to see his work, and we left the restaurant, Dimitri taking along a piece of the tablecloth he'd been sketching on. At the studio, he told me about a technique he'd recently become interested in, the lost wax process. He had noticed many young Italian sculptors working in a black wax instead of the traditional clay. He explained that when a bronze is cast from this wax, only 2 steps of reversal are required, whereas clay has to be duplicated 6 times. Not as though the technique was new. The Egyptians had already made use of it, but since the time of Benvenuto Cellini, it seemed to have fallen into disuse. He had a lot of this wax around the studio, and while we were talking, he started making a small figure. I suggested making a film about his work in this newfound medium, and natural-born ham that he was, he agreed. Next morning, I moved in with my camera. My bed was Dimitri's mattress on the floor, while he made do with the bare springs. Every morning for the next 2 months, Dimitri made tea, while I went stiffly out to buy pastries. That first morning, though, Dimitri was not to be hurried. The Italians had taught him that you don't rush mealtimes. So while he was browsing through the young lions, I took a closer look around the studio. During his Fulbright scholarship in Greece, he had gotten interested in Greek mythology and started a series of small bronzes of centaurs, like this one. During the night, he had developed the restaurant sketch and the piece of wax he had been fooling with into a centaur carrying off a lapis. On the wall, there were sketches for future projects, among them a fire eater who used to entertain at the taverna. I got so interested in poking around that I didn't notice Dimitri had gotten to work. While I was shooting the film, I discovered there were many ways to work this wax, but the groundwork is usually done by kneading the wax with your fingers, using the body heat to get it to the proper working consistency. The possibilities increase with the help of a small alcohol burner. For instance, by heating a metal plaster tool over it and applying it to the wax, you can get a very smooth surface texture. Not many days after I started shooting, Dimitri lost interest in the centaur and took up a piece he had started several months before. This lady feeding pigeons needed a small circle of wire to support the birds around her, although, because of the small size of the pieces and the natural rigidity of the black wax, this work doesn't usually require such an armature. The bird lady was pretty well finished, but Dimitri worked several weeks more before he even began to be satisfied with the smaller details. One bright morning, I found Dimitri hurrying through his coffee while shaving. And then I found out why. By this time it was the middle of July, and in Rome, the middle of July is hot. Dimitri had to dip the bird lady into a pail of cold water every now and then to keep the wax from getting too soft. At this point, he decided to take the piece down to the foundry to find out if there would be any difficulty in the casting. And there would be. The owner of the foundry told us that Dimitri would have to heavy up the wax covering the armature a good deal before they'd even consider casting it. Even then, they wouldn't guarantee a successful casting. It was a difficult job, and really too much trouble for its small size. And if anything went wrong, the wax original would be lost completely. Since small statues are usually cast in groups, we were told we might have to wait up to 2 weeks for the foundry to assemble enough other small pieces. And so we returned to Dimitri's studio and sat. He tried various things to keep occupied, but whatever his hands did, his mind was down at the foundry with the bird lady. The foundry had started to paint the statues with layer after layer of a thin mixture of ground brick and plaster of Paris in water. Each layer had to be completely dry before the next one could be applied. This continued until the statues were completely encased in cylinders of this mixture. And the days dragged on. When the cylinders were dry, they were put into a large brick oven, and as the high temperature made the wax melt, it flowed out of a small channel. The void left by the wax was then filled with molten bronze, and thus the name cire perdue, or lost wax process. But finally, we couldn't wait any longer. We went down to the foundry several days too soon. And all they could show us was the steaming oven with the bird lady in it and the wax slowly oozing out. The day had arrived. They were breaking the mold that contained the bronze. No one could tell us, even at this stage, whether the casting had been a success. But it was. In its present condition, though, the bird lady wasn't much to look at. It took a lot for Dimitri to decide to bring it back to a recognizable state. Every small imperfection of the casting process had to be chipped, chased, and chiseled away, and the armature that had been so carefully weighted at the foundry had to be literally carved back to size. At first we worked at the foundry, but soon we were back at the studio where we could take off our shirts and suffer a little less from the Roman summer. By now, finishing the Bird Lady had become an obsession with Dimitri. A week or two later, he decided that he had gone as far as he could. All that remained now was to polish her with some fine abrasives and to set her on a wooden base. But Dimitri was already thinking about other things.